Hello and welcome to The Final Word, the show where we bring you the day's biggest stories and tell you what they mean for you. In New Delhi, I'm Pranjal Sharma.
Very good evening. In Mumbai, I'm Abha Bakaya. Also coming up on the show.
Bloomberg UTV's Mini Menon talked about the art of giving to some of the more famous names connected with CSR, Anand Mahindra, Ajay Piramal, and JSW Foundation's chairperson, Sangeeta Jindal.
Many began asking Anand Mahindra if social innovation is going to be the key and whether India will find its own solutions to its problems.
I like the fact that Pierre Omidyar made that his central thesis, that from what he had seen, the stark contrast here between poverty and great wealth, he felt that this was actually an opportunity. An opportunity when you used and deployed Indian intellectual talents to solving these problems, you would get social innovation which would be world class. I thought that was a very interesting concept. And I mean it when I say that I think we've reached the point of evolution in our economy and in our society where now the time is ripe to move beyond wanting to have the largest company or the largest net worth to saying, can we be the best social innovators in the world? So great takeaway from this panel this morning.
Mr. Piramal, on the ground in India, are the solutions largely very, very India-oriented? I mean, can you impose other solutions in the kind of, complex society, in the complex structures of India?
So in Pratham, which is the largest NGO in India and which I'm associated with, we did a survey to assess the status of education in India. It's called ASAR and it's released every year. And we found that kids who were in the 5th standard could actually read only up to as if they were in the 2nd, so they were pushed up. And therefore then we created innovation and created a program which is called Read India program, which is, we created the whole syllabus and the methodology, and then within 6 weeks we could see that the reading abilities had gone up significantly, and this was then again measured the next year and the results were there for everybody to see. Another example I'll give you that in India, lots of people all over in rural India as well as in actually big cities have lots of issues on health and they want answers. They don't have access to, let's say, the net, or they don't have very often easy access to doctors, and therefore in HMRI, which is again an NGO that is run by us, we created a call center which is running in Hyderabad today, and where there are now 30 to 40,000 people calling every day to just get answers to some of the basic questions that they had. So again, this may not have happened in a developed country, but you can see these examples in India.
In fact, a lot of people in corporate India, actually corporate India works very, very closely with rural societies. With JSW is a classic example of that. What's the kind of work that you're doing then? What are the learnings from that?
You see, as I said, there are two types of Indias. One is we all live in these big metropolitan cities, but the reality is in the rural areas. So wherever our factories are, all over India, we try and do our bit. I mean, as we say, as Ajay says, that we are a drop. But maybe if all of us work together, maybe 10 years from now, 20 years from now, something will happen.
Now, scalability. Can scalability come with isolated cases, or do you need something like two of the biggest examples of social projects that have really had a great impact are Amul and Seva. Both are for profit, and that's why they managed to scale up. Do we need to look at models like that?
Ajay earlier in the panel talked about how government has the capacity to scale, and that's true. What I think, however, is that the government needs templates. They need template creators, people who can show them what is the right model. So the Nandi NGO, for example, in providing clean drinking water, is doing 400 villages, which is a lot of villages, but it's far lower than the number in the country. What they do is they actually provide a service to the state government. So they go to the state government and they say, you pay my capital cost, I will run this and show you how it's run. So it's almost like a build, operate, transfer. And that to me is the way the private sector and NGOs can really contribute. They can provide the templates And then you go to whoever can scale it up. If it's for-profit, businesses,
but do you see that
not-for-profit government.
interface happening with government where they're looking and working with...
Enormously. And I won't go into it. If you look at Nandi and what is done, both on the midday meal as well as on water, its entire model is that we are simply going to be service providers to the government. They don't do this directly. They get the government to come in and actually deliver and distribute and fund. And they are just providing templates and the management services.
You know, the social work aspect has been largely a forte of government because the sheer scale and the level of development we are in. Do you think there is enough being done in terms of policy matters? Because somewhere we also seem a little confused. MFI is a classic example, from the poster boys to the villains, in a matter of months. I mean, obviously there was something amiss. Do we need a very clear policy framework, a 5-year plan to actually get this?
The government, by and large, today is really focused on what's happening in the 5 years. This is where we have to give suggestions where you can build for the long term. So if you're talking of health, it may not have an immediate effect, but it is going to have a long-term effect. If you're talking of really creating an institute for educating, let's say, headmasters or something, that's going to take time, and that's where corporates can play one role. Second, I think our social sector, NGOs, the second role is that really giving the voice of the downtrodden. Very often government only hears the vocal bodies, whether it's industry associations or whether people can, make very good presentations. But they are the poorest of the poor or the most deprived. They don't have a voice. That's where NGOs can bring this voice up to the government so that solutions can be got. Thirdly, we talked about social innovation. Social innovation is not going to come from the government sector because they cannot take risk. That is where, in any innovation you have to understand that there is risk. You have to keep having a model, improvising it, sometimes junking it, getting another model. So that risk is not, that's what a social initiative or corporate can do. And finally, in execution, I think we're better in execution than what government is, so it can help draw the parameters. I think that's where the role is.
The fact is that the media is very quick to write off Indian industry, saying that, look at Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and look at the money that they're handing out. Has it been unfair? Because, at the end of the day, if you see the history of any company or any group, they have done a lot for the areas and the thing. I mean, is the spotlight being on you uncomfortable, or do you think it also gets all of you to, ideate on it?
I have no problem on the spotlight. I have no problem with pressure on us to give back. I think some of the comparisons are just irrational, if not unfair, because as I mentioned, and I'm going to be equally blunt, that I think Bill Gates has done a wonderful job, but one has to recognize that for a large part of his career, there was a huge amount of criticism he faced in America for not giving back to society. So maybe that pressure was good for him. But today, it would be unfair to talk only about them as benchmarks. I started Nanhi Kali when I was in Mahindra Eugene Steel, and I gave only 1 million rupees, which was a far larger portion of my income at that stage. And at that time, Bill Gates and I graduated at the same year at Harvard. At that time when I started this, he wasn't about to give back. He gave back much later. So it's not the amount. To me, what is important is, at that time, that was a large sum of money. So I think people don't do their research when they go back and make these comparisons. But pressure, fine. Keep the pressure on. Good for us.
You can catch that entire panel discussion on the weekend right here on Bloomberg UTV. Coming up with the Bloomberg UTV Autocar Awards, just a few days away, we bring you the top 5 small car contenders for a Car of the Year award. That's up next.